Hope you had a good week. It's weekend again, so let's review another very interesting research paper, and today we're going to talk about military interrogations. I made several previous videos related to police interrogation. Some viewers asked, what are the differences between police interrogations and military interrogations? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today on the basis of two interesting research papers that I recently read. There are similarities and differences between these two types of interrogations. For this video today, we're going to focus on 5 key differences between these two types of interrogations. The objectives of the interrogations differ, the interrogators and their training and their background differ, the interrogation subjects or the interrogatives differ, how these interrogations are governed and regulated differ, and finally the techniques used in these interrogations differ. Let's take a closer look at these 5 differences. The first difference is a crucial fundamental difference between these two types of interrogations, the objectives. Generally speaking, most of the time, the ultimate objective of police interrogation is to facilitate prosecution and conviction. In other words, the police officer wants to eventually convict the suspect of their crime. This explains why criminal interrogations conducted by police officers are often accusatorial and are very much focused on eliciting incriminating statements and/or confessions from the suspect. For military interrogations, the objectives, generally speaking, most of the time, have little to do with prosecution and conviction. Their objective is to extract intel that is useful for military operations and/or other national security or intelligence purposes. In other words, military interrogations want to acquire reliable and useful information in a timely manner. So these are two fundamentally different objectives. The second difference is that the interrogators are very different. Police interrogations are conducted by police officers, usually detectives, but it could also be other law enforcement personnel. Research shows that the training that these individuals receive would typically consist of a formal course that is between 4 days to about a week, and subsequent on-the-job informal training to learn how to conduct these criminal interrogations. Military interrogations, on the other hand, are conducted most of the time by military intelligence officers. It is reported that these interrogators need to go through a 16-week training program to qualify. Military interrogators also had to meet a high threshold score on a standardized aptitude test, top 15%, and were required to be proficient in a second language. Although these last 2 points are no longer required so stringently due to a lack of military interrogators as reported in Redlich 2007. So that's the second difference here. The interrogators differ. Number 3, the interrogation subjects or the interrogatives differ. Generally speaking, most of the time, police interrogations are conducted on civilian citizens who are suspected of a crime. American police officers typically interrogate American citizens in these criminal interrogations. British police interrogate British people. Dutch police interrogate Dutch people. So on and so forth. Military interrogations, on the other hand, are often conducted on foreign nationals on foreign land. These could be captured enemy prisoners of war or EPWs or foreign operatives who might have information that is of use to the military or the intelligence agencies who are conducting the interrogation. The fact that these interrogation subjects are often foreign nationals would require the interrogators to be able to effectively maneuver through cultural and linguistic barriers, which is something that police interrogators most of the time do not have to deal with in the context of criminal interrogations. Number 4, how the interrogations are governed and regulated differs a great deal too. Police interrogations are typically governed by the court system of that specific country. For instance, what is allowed and what is not allowed to take place during police interrogations in the US would be governed by the American court system and all the relevant American laws. Whereas how the Canadian law enforcement officers conduct their criminal interrogations are governed by the Canadian court system and Canadian laws. So the regulatory construction is rather clear and straightforward when it comes to criminal interrogations. Military interrogations, on the other hand, are governed differently. For example, the Enhanced Interrogation Program, which was put into place after 9/11, was conceived, approved, and governed by a complex system involving the White House, Department of Justice, Department of Defense, the Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, and likely numerous other governmental entities as well. In other words, the way military interrogations are overseen and regulated is quite complex. It is not so black and white. There could be numerous gray areas, sometimes intentionally. Again, take the enhanced interrogation program as an example. It is reported that the program was specifically constructed so that the individuals who are interrogated were classified as detainees instead of EPWs. The reason for that is, as it is reported, prisoners of war or criminal suspects or certain other types of captives may be afforded certain levels of protection by various laws and treaties. So it's important for this program to classify its subjects not as any of those groups, so that those laws and treaties and regulatory systems would not cover and protect these detainees, so that enhanced interrogations can legally take place. Anyway, so this is an example of how criminal interrogations conducted by the police and military interrogations conducted by the armed forces can differ a great deal in terms of how they are regulated and governed. And finally, number 5, tactical divergence, or differences in interrogation tactics and techniques. In this area, there are big differences. For police interrogation, there are various models and programs on which police interrogation techniques are based. For example, the READ program and the PEACE model are examples of programs which equip police officers with interrogation methods and techniques. Common examples of police interrogation techniques include rapport building, good cop, bad cop routine, blaming the victim, false promises of leniency, the use of false evidence ploys, etc., etc. Please watch these earlier videos of mine if you're interested. It is important to note that all the police interrogation techniques, some of which could be considered as quite deceptive and manipulative, but they do not involve any physical harm. It is illegal to subject the suspect to any physical harm. In fact, simply threatening the suspect with physical harm can invalidate the entire criminal interrogation. But for military interrogations conducted on foreign land on foreign subjects, detainees, the use of physical force could be deemed legal in certain situations. Again, the most well-known example of this is probably the enhanced interrogation program to which we referred earlier. According to reports, these enhanced interrogation techniques include physical violence, so basically just beating people up, confinement in small spaces for an extended period of time, so basically you put the detainee in a small box or a cage and just leave them there for quite some time. And this was actually depicted in the movie Zero Dark 30. Other techniques include deprivation of food and drinks, withholding of medical care, waterboarding, which is a very famous example, putting the detainee in stress positions, which basically means you force the detainee to stay in a painful physical position, usually for a long period of time, subjection to extreme noise, subjection to extreme heat and cold, walling, which means a person's neck is encircled by a collar and then it is used to slam that person against the wall, sleep deprivation to the point of hallucination, sexual humiliation, which is also depicted in Zero Dark 30, white torture, also known as sensory deprivation. So this means you put somebody in a completely white, colorless room, there's no sound, there's no activity, no human interactions whatsoever. Even the light source is a soft light source, so that there is no shadow and no shade. So essentially it is just complete isolation and complete nothingness. Subjecting a person to such an environment for an extended period of time, weeks, months, sometimes even years, would result in disorientation, hallucination, loss of personal identity, and just basically going insane. And the list goes on. So there are numerous enhanced interrogation techniques which, according to reports, have been used as part of the enhanced interrogation program. So this is the 5th difference between police interrogations, which typically do not involve physical violence, versus military interrogations, which under certain circumstances can legally involve enhanced physical pressure. Now, obviously, not all military intelligence interrogations would be this extreme. In fact, according to the Field Manual of the US Armed Forces, there is a specific section dealing with military intelligence interrogation. This document has been made publicly available by the US Armed Forces, and we can see from this document that many military interrogation techniques are essentially the same as police interrogation techniques. So there is a lot of similarity and overlap. But one of the most crucial and most obvious differences in terms of techniques is the permissible use of physical force in certain situations in military interrogations. Alright, that's it. So based on these 2 very interesting research papers that I recently read, these are the 5 differences between police and military interrogations. Hope you find this video interesting. Please like and subscribe. Have a good week and I'll see you next weekend.